Hello everybody and welcome to RevitMan's first Revit tutorial. I am RevitMan. This tutorial will cover a basic introduction to Revit, where you can get it, and how to navigate the user interface. I will be using Revit 2015 for my tutorials, and there will be a difference with earlier versions in some aspects, but not in this first tutorial. So before we get started what is Revit? Well, Revit is a BIM program. So what is BIM? BIM is a building information modeling. So not only does the program model components and objects, but it also contains information about those elements. So now you know what Revit is, you're probably wondering where you can get it. Here you have several options. You can purchase Revit from Autodesk. You can get a 30-day trial from Autodesk, or if you're a student, you can get free downloads of any Autodesk software and a 3-year license to do so. But academic versions of the software cannot be used for commercial uses and are simply for educational projects. So in order to get the 30-day trial of Revit, please follow the first link in the description below. When you do, you'll come to this screen right here, and all you gotta do is click this download trial button, install the program, and follow all the directions that it asks you to. For the student version, you would need to follow the second link in the description below, and this is the screen that you would come to. The only difference is that with the student version, you have to sign up, or either sign in or create an account with the Autodesk education community, and then go ahead and download your software from this website. Follow all the instructions to download and install. The downloads and installation may take anywhere from a few minutes to a few hours depending on your computer's speed. So once you have Revit installed, go ahead and open it up and we'll continue on with the tutorial. Alright, so now once you open Revit, this should be the first screen that you should see. I'll start with the R in the top left corner of the screen. This is like the file menu in many other programs. So just click on the R and you get a drop down of a number of different functions like new, open, save, export, publish, print, close. And this is also where the options menu is for Revit. If you notice over here on the right side of this pop-up is that there's a list of your recent documents show up here, so it makes it quick, easy access to open any of the past documents you've opened. And you notice these little pins here. You can actually pin that project to this list, so it'll always be visible for you. So which I might do that with my template file here because I'll always be editing that. And then if you notice when you hover over some of these other selections, you get other sub selections that show up in that same panel. I'm not going to go into any depth on what some of these are. That's up to you to explore and figure out. Some of these I might get to in later tutorials, but for the most part, I'm not going to go over those. So back on the main screen that you see here, it's broken down into two sections here, projects and families. Projects are where you would model a building, for example. Families are more objects that you would insert into your model, like furniture, doors, windows, etc. You can see a few examples of what families are down here below in these thumbnails. So you're going to see underneath projects here we have open, new, various templates, and thumbnails of various architectural projects. Same with families. I'm not going to cover families today. That's a different tutorial. So stay tuned for that. The projects here, you can open a project a number of ways. Click open. You can go up to the R and open, or you can just select a recent project that shows up here. But for this tutorial, we're going to click New, and you notice this box pops up here, and it asks you for what template file do you want to use. You can see the four templates loaded in by default right here: construction, architectural, structural, and mechanical. Those are also listed here in the drop down. So most companies have their own template file that they use, and it's preloaded and it contains all of their company standards, so you shouldn't really have to worry about selecting a template. But if you're not familiar with it, you can choose none, but then you're up to creating all your own, um, creating everything up from scratch pretty much. If you use a template, some things are set up. So for the purpose of this tutorial, we're going to use the architectural template. And you can always browse if you already have a template file from an earlier version, or have downloaded a template file for something. You can always browse and load it this way. And the next box here is create new. Do we want to create a new project, or do we want to create a new project template? Well, we want to create a new project for this tutorial, and we'll cover the project template stuff in a later date. So go ahead and click OK after you've selected project. And it may take a little while to open, depending on the speed of your computer. Alright, so now this is the window that will pop up once Revit actually opens the project. And it'll look pretty much the same. You can customize what this start screen looks like when you open a project, but we're not going to cover that. So you can see this big white space here. This is called the workspace. This is where all of your modeling will take place in Revit. So anything you create will be visible here. And anytime you open up a different view of your project, it opens up a new workspace. So then you can have multiple workspaces open at a time, so you can see how things relate as you draw them in 2D. You can see them in 3D all at the same time. So that's really nice. Up here in the top right corner is the navigation bar. This contains two icons. The first is the steering wheel icon, which if you click on it, you can see you got pan and zoom and other settings for if you're creating a walkthrough for Revit. This wheel will change a little bit depending on what view you have open, but for the most part, it'll stay the same. And the next one is zoom. So if you click on the arrow underneath zoom, you can see all the different zoom options. This is just a quick way to navigate your model if you don't have a mouse with a scroll wheel or use any of the shortcuts. This is how you would navigate your model. Alright, next to the left of your workspace, you're going to have two palettes. You have the properties palette and the project browser. The properties palette is similar to what you would see in AutoCAD software. It's the properties palette. This is where you're going to have all the information about the elements in your project. When you select it, different settings will pop up. You can change the different settings. So if you notice, like this one says view, it's a floor plan. You can set all the different settings for this specific view. And if I select an object, you can see, okay, building elevation. There's no settings I can change at the moment for this one. But for the most part, this is where you would change any settings related to an object or a view within your project. The project browser is essentially a list tree of the elements in your project. So the main categories are views, legends, schedules and quantities, sheets, families, groups, and Revit links. So as you can see, if you expand the views folder, you'll see that the various view types are listed below. Like I have floor plans, ceiling plans, and elevations, which these are set up in the template that we opened. If you opened a none, there may not be any views visible when you expand the views folder. When you create new views, they'll be listed here, and they'll be sorted depending on what type of view they are. And you can get into more micro level sorting of them based off of the use of, say, we wanted an interior elevation, we wanted to say interior elevation. Well, we could do that. I'm not going to cover that now. That'll be a later tutorial, but you can really customize how the stuff is sorted in this browser. The next one is legends. Legends are objects that you would want visible on multiple sheets. So this is typically like general notes, keynotes, symbol legends, anything that would be placed onto multiple sheets when you print. Schedules and quantities are pretty much what it says. Schedule, if you don't know what it is, it's just it's almost like an Excel document where it lists all the different types in a tabular format of, like, say, doors or windows or walls. And then quantities, you can use that tool to generate quantity takeoffs so you can do accurate estimating for your project to get a good construction cost. Next is sheets. Sheets in Revit are the graphic representation of what you would actually be printing. So this is where you would lay out your views, your title blocks, your images, your notes, all that onto a sheet. That's where you compose your sheets for printing. And again, you can sort the sheets out by various different categories as well, like you would with the views. Next is families. This is a list of all of the components and elements loaded into your project. Here you can add, edit, or delete families from the list. You can also use it to create a new instance of a family into your model. We'll cover this a little bit more in depth once we get into actually modeling families and loading them into projects. Next is the groups. Groups, if you have ever used Google SketchUp, are kind of what you same principle for using groups in SketchUp. You have a bunch of elements that you want to group them together, and you want to move or copy or rotate all those elements at once rather than having to select a bunch of separate elements and repeating the process. It kind of speeds things up. So if you have some standardized room layout, for example, you could copy that, create a group out of it, and then just copy that group or place that group multiple times rather than having to select the individual elements every time. So that's what a group is, and any groups you create in the project will be listed under groups. Revit links is when you link in a Revit model to your model. They'll show up underneath the Revit links. This is most commonly used for, like at work, I use it for linking in consultant models, structural and MEP models into our Revit model. Alright, the next thing to cover is this little toolbar down here. These are icons to allow you to quickly change various view settings without having to go into the properties of that view. Like, you can quickly change the scale, the detail level, you can hide elements, you can reveal elements that were hidden, etc. So these are just, we're not going to cover them now, but these are just quick view changes that will come in handy while we're modeling. Alright, the next thing we're going to cover is this toolbar up here just to the right of the R. This is called the Quick Access Toolbar. And kind of like the view toolbar that I just showed you below, it's a series of icons of commonly used tools in Revit. So if you use a tool quite often, you can add it to the quick access toolbar, and then it's just one click rather than trying to figure out what tab it's under and then selecting the correct tool. So it makes drafting a little faster and easier in the long run. But for the most part, just leave it where it's at until you get a little more familiar with Revit, and then you can add or remove objects from this toolbar. And if you don't like it where it's at, you can click this drop down menu and you can show it below the ribbon and have it show up here. It's a personal preference wherever you want to show it. There's no right or wrong way. Just thought you might want to change it. All right, so then this toolbar over here, I call this the Autodesk toolbar. I'm not really sure what its real name is, but it contains information about your Autodesk account, your Autodesk 360, Autodesk Exchange apps. You got the help. You also can run a search through the help documents right from inside of Revit. It comes in handy a little bit, but most of the time I just Google whenever I need help with figuring something out in Revit. But that's up to you if you use it or not. Alright, the next thing we're going to cover is this big toolbar here. This is called the ribbon, and you may be familiar with it if you use like the newer Microsoft Office software and other Autodesk products all have the ribbon. This is kind of getting more to the standard of it because I think it's quicker to access the tools that you need in this format rather than previous formats. So the ribbon is broken down into tabs that you see across here at the top, and then you got panels, and then you got your tools. You can also, if you don't, you can always minimize the look of the panel, so you can do it where it's just tabs. You can, do the full graphic display. There's various options if you click this little arrow over here. So one thing to note is that when you hover over a tool, you get a little bit of a description, and then if you keep hovering over it, you'll get a larger description and a graphic image of what this tool is and what it does. Some of them have little animations to them. So it's just, if you're not sure what something does, it's a good first look at what that tool might be doing. So I'm going to start covering over the tabs and explaining what each of the tabs contain. The first is the architecture tab. So this is where you're mostly going to do all your architectural modeling, doors, windows, etc. This is what you're going to primarily use to create pretty much just about anything in your architectural model. The next tab is structural. You may or may not use this tab depending on what your function is. Most of the time it's used by the structural engineer, and unless you're modeling on an architecturally model, I know for school projects I do use this so that I can model structural elements accurately. But for the most part, we have a structural engineer that's a consultant that would do the modeling using the structures tab. Then there's the systems tab. Again, this is more consultant work unless you're the MEP consultants. So you're going to have your HVAC stuff, your plumbing, and your electrical components. I haven't learned any of this stuff, so I'm not really sure what it does. But if I do get around to learning some of it, I will do a tutorial on it. But for right now, I really don't know much about that. Next tab is the Insert tab. This is where if you want to bring anything into Revit that's not already in there, this is the tab that you would use. So you can link other models, you can import other models, other file types, images, and you can load other families and groups into the project as well from this tab. Alright, next is the Annotate tab. This is where you would put in all of the 2D information needed for the project, so such as dimensions, annotations, revisions, text, tags, symbols, legends, keynotes, etc. All the 2D graphical information that they would need to construct a project, construct a building. using the documents. So if you're a student, you may or may not use it, but I know in the professional world it is something that we use quite often. Next is Analyze tab. Again, this is mostly for structural and MEP analysis, but there is this panel over here on the right called Energy Analysis. This is not something that I have used, but I can see it being used for architectural projects to, analyze a project's sustainability or energy efficiency for LEED or for other green building and sustainability issues. Like I said, I have not used it, but if I do learn how to use it, I will do a tutorial on it. So I may end up having to use it quite soon, so I may learn it faster than I anticipated. Next tab is the Massing and Site tab. So massing is more what you do in the conceptual phase of it when you're just trying to get your building massing down and quickly model various forms. It's also used for complex modeling, so like a parametric curve or a parabolic curve or something like that. Something that's not typically modeled. And then you can apply roofs, walls, and floors to a mass. But I'll cover that in a later tutorial. There's also site tools as well. So you got your topography and you got trees and parking, as well as other tools which we'll get into when we start doing some site modeling. The Collaborate tab is something that most people don't use unless they're working in a firm where there's multiple people working on the same project at the same time. This is when you would want to use the Collaborate tab. So I will cover that at some point in one of my tutorials, but for right now, just know that that's what it's used for. The View toolbar, or the View tab, has all of your tools needed for modifying and creating new views into your project. The Manage tab pretty much has tools that manage the project as a whole. So you've got your project materials, your project parameters, design options, and phases. So its project-wide settings are managed in the Manage tab. Next is add-ins. So I mentioned up here this Autodesk Exchange apps. You can download apps and add-ins for Revit that make its functionality greater. Like I have a hatch kit add-in to help develop different types of hatches that aren't standard in Revit. And I also have an elevator architect. So you may or may not have add-ins in your Revit version, and you can always go and add it. Some are free, some are not. But definitely check that out if you're looking for something to be done specifically. There may be an add-in that would be applicable to your situation. This next tab, you guys don't worry about it. This is a special add-in that I have. It had more tools in it than a normal add-in would, so it created its own tab, so I wouldn't worry about that. Next is the Modify tab. This is where the tab you would use when you want to make any sort of modifications to your model. So move, copy, offset, align, stuff like that. It's very, very functional and it's very frequently used throughout the modeling process. And now last but not least, there's this final toolbar down here at the bottom. Again, not sure what it's called, but you have this text over here on the left. This is almost like the Autodesk command line, except for you can't type in it. It just shows you information about it. So like if I select this, it tells me, or if I hover over it, it tells me, oh, that's elevation 3. I selected it, I can rotate it. If I start a function, it'll tell me what the next step is. So it's kind of like the command line and the fact that it tells you what's next and what you have highlighted, but you can't enter any information into it. This area over here on the right is more selection settings. So you've got like how do you want to select your links and elements and pinned elements, and we're not really going to cover these icons, and the default settings here are pretty much standard and work just fine, so I would leave them where they're at until you're a little more familiar with how Revit functions. These two boxes here, this first one here manages your work set. So if you're working on something and you need to change your work set, you can do that in this box. Again, this will be covered in a later tutorial. And this box here is for design options, and you can show which ones are visible, which ones are not visible. That's all up to you, and that's managed quickly in this little toolbar here. So that's everything that I wanted to show you today. So that was just a basic rundown of how to get Revit, how to navigate the user interface. And in subsequent tutorials here, I'll be showing you the basics of modeling in Revit. So if you enjoyed this tutorial and would like to learn more, then please subscribe to my channel, join my blog where you'll have access to these videos, as well as downloadable Revit content as I create it. The link is in the description below the video. Like my page on Facebook, and feel free to leave comments about anything that I may have left out of this tutorial or something that you would like to see in future tutorials. So thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.